Afternoon to everybody here. Welcome to this webinar of the Miriam Institute. I'm very, very proud and honored to have as our guest Major General Yair Golan, reservist in the Israel Defense Forces, former Deputy Chief of Staff for the Israel Defense Forces, and most notably of late member of Knesset. I'm going to read his bio to everybody so that you understand the caliber of the individual we have the pleasure of listening to. It's as follows. Major General Yair Golan concluded his service in the Israel Defense Forces as the Deputy Chief of the General Staff, a position he held from 2014 to 2017. During his military career, he held several key positions, including Commander of the Nachal Brigade, Commander of the 91st Division, and Commander of the Judea and Samaria Division. He also commanded the IDF Home Front Command, which he led during Operation Cast Lead. In 2011, he assumed command for the IDF Northern Command, a position he held until his service as Deputy Chief of the General Staff for the Israel Defense Forces. He entered Israeli politics in 2019 and is a leading figure in the Democratic Union Party. He holds a BA in Political Science from Tel Aviv University and a Master of Public Administration from Harvard University. Additionally, he's a graduate of both the IDF's Command and Staff College and the United States Army War College. What I've read there is a reduced bio, I can assure you, but on behalf of all of us at the Miriam Institute and on behalf of all of our listeners, Yair, may I call you Yair? Welcome to the webinar. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for listening and to joining this conversation. And maybe we can start with all these annexation business. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I've got another suggestion though, just for you, because it's listed and I have a list to ask you about annexation. I want to give you an opportunity as a great leader of the Israeli military and so forth. I want to ask you, do you have words for Americans, many of whom are on this call, or many of whom on this call are Americans, on Memorial Day? Do you have a word for the servicemen and women of the United States Armed Forces that you might like to just speak off the cuff in your own words?
Well, we celebrate the 20th anniversary of withdrawing from Lebanon. And withdrawing is supposed to be a sad story, but in Israel, probably we are very happy about we withdrew from Lebanon. And I think every nation need to choose its wars at the state level, and we need to remember all the time that by the decisions of leaders, there are soldiers and commanders who need to fight, and they need to fight the best way they can. And I can tell you, I grew up in Lebanon. I was a warrior all over my career. And I have a vast experience of being under fire and skirmishes with the Hezbollah and other, terrorist faction. And I can tell you one thing. I have very strong admiration and a sense of gratitude to any military man of a democratic nation. So concerning that, I salute the wonderful men and women of the U.S. Armed Forces. And I can feel the proud and the sorrow at the same time. And I can feel the enthusiasm of the warrior, and at the same time, the anxiety of the families. And we need to stick with one very strong principle. Whenever we use our armed forces, we need to be sure that it's for a just cause. The just cause is almost everything. It's the very beginning of any violent policy. And we need to remember that, because we ask good men and women to devote everything, including their life, for the well-being of their nations. And it's totally unacceptable to use these young men and women for nothing. And therefore, I enter politics because I feel I can make these decisions better than others. It's not about me. It's not about being a nationwide leader or something like this. It's about being responsible. It's about taking my professionalism and put it in the political arena, behalf of our soldiers, behalf of our nation. And I'm sure, as far as I know, many people in the armed forces of the United States, that it works the same in America. I know so many American generals and so many Americans NCOs at the same time. Wonderful people, truly wonderful people, with the best intentions, with much enthusiasm, with so much devotion. And we need to remember, they do it only when they believe that there is a just cause. That's all I can say, concerning that.
Thank you so much for those warm words, and I know that they come from your heart and they will then therefore penetrate the hearts of our listeners. And it's very important that people hear that from someone like you. Now, in the introduction of you, at no point did I say that you're a politician, because you're not a politician. You're a member of Knesset, but you're actually a leader. You're an individual who is bound to his convictions. You are strongly, forthrightly of the political left in the state of Israel, which I want to talk to you about in due course. It's very important for us here at the Miriam Institute, Yair, to bring different perspectives, including yours, to anybody who's willing to listen. And we don't mind if they agree or they disagree. What we care for is that they grant it their due consideration. And I know that that's something that you've always found very, very important. So the omission of the word politician, I want you to be aware, was very, very deliberate on my part. And I hope that you agree with me. You've come to the political scene not to engage in politicking, but to lead. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. And, and thank you for the warm words, but I would like to deliberate more about, what is to be a politician in Israel today. What is the meaning of that?
Please.
And I would say the following. I entered the politics, the main cause I entered the politics is to prevent annexation. And I consider annexation as the end of the Jewish state. Because today in Israel, we need to remember that 80% of the population are Jews and 20% of the population are Arabs. And we need to remember that the Israeli miracle is that we were able to unify ourselves while the Arabs, the Palestinian Arabs, didn't. And this is the story of Israel. We were unified, they were separated, and therefore we were managed to establish our state, our independent state, and they didn't. If we annex them, the outcome will be a unification of the Palestinians. It's crazy. It's crazy. What we need to do is to separate ourselves from them and at the same time to hug the Arab citizens of Israel. it's not about them. It's not just about, moral stand. It's not just about our day perspective, to treat them well as human beings, which is right. Even from our very practical perspective, we need to hug the Arab citizens of Israel, and we need to separate ourselves from the rest. This is the only way to do two things at the same time. First, to keep Israel as the Jewish state, as the Jewish homeland for the whole and for the entire Jewish nation, and at the same time, to keep the Arabs, the Palestinian Arabs of Israel, separated. And if you look deep into the future, this is the only way. The land is not so important. The nation is much more important. So when I confront this idea of annexation, I do it from a very, very strong Zionist stand. It's behalf of our very practical and moral considerations. And we need to remember what is the vision of Israel. The vision of Israel is about having one state on earth for the Jewish people. For the Jewish people, so it must have a Jewish nature. And you cannot keep the Jewish nature of Israel without having strong majority of Jews in Israel. So annexation is against the Zionist idea. It's against the Israeli idea. It's against what we ever dreamed about. And it's totally unacceptable. And I think that today people want this annexation because of ignorance and because they have some sort of messianic approach. And messianic approach is destructive for the for the destiny of Israel. Totally destructive. Every time the Jewish people stick with messianic approach, it was a disaster. Every time along our long history, a disaster. So why would we stick with this, messianic approach today? And I know that there are very good Israelis, good people, good men and women, that, I can live with them happily in ordinary days, but they still stick with this messianic approach. So we need to suppress this messianic approach, and we need to return to the very basics of Zionism. And the basic idea of Zionism is about having a Jewish state, a democratic state, with a strong Jewish majority, with the best attitude to everyone who is not Jewish. This is my vision. So this is the first reason why I entered politics.
That's incredible to hear. So you were so concerned about the idea of applying sovereignty to the Jordan Valley that you made a career change, went into public service, went into politics, and that's tied in, as you said earlier, to your dedication to making sure that if men and women are sent into harm's way, it's for a just and due and frankly unavoidable reason. Is that a fair paraphrasing of reasoning?
Yeah, I would say even more than that.
Please.
People think that, all right, what's the problem? Let's annex, the Jordan Valley. There's no problem about it. It's almost empty of Arabs. We keep Jericho for the Palestinian Authority. So what is the problem? And we don't think about the consequences of such an annexation. The Jordan Valley is about 30% of Judea and Samaria and 60% of the free land of Judea and Samaria. So if you take out of any Palestinian entity, possible entity in the future, you take, 1/3 of their land, that they have only two choices. The first one is to take it, as it is, and to comply with, our activities. And this is the most terrible reaction, because the meaning of that is that in a protracted process, they will be Israeli citizens. There is no other way. Mm-hmm. There's no other way. And the second option for them is to revolt and to go for the third intifada. And it will cost a lot of blood for them and for us. And I think that there is no reason. I fought in the first intifada, I fought in the second intifada, I fought in almost basically I fought in every Palestinian city except Jericho. Every Palestinian city. Well, it was a successful fighting, but I have no intention, to do it over and over and over again. It's ridiculous. It's by the end of the day, there are families who goes to the military graveyards to mourn the most precious, relatives. Why we need to go to experience this, terrible experience over and over again? Don't we want to keep even a slight chance for peace, for some sort of reconciliation process? Don't we want something to deliver something better to our children? Well, we need to do something. We need to take responsibility in order to shape our region and in order to shape Eretz Israel in the most practical and visionary manner. And in my mind, this is part of being a new Jew. We are not passive. We do not wait for someone else to make decisions for us. We don't want to just lay down and, leaving the history for, random circumstances. We want to take responsibility. I was a warrior all over my career. I took responsibility over and over and over again. And I think that in the national level, we need to take responsibility to our destiny and to the destiny of the Palestinians. We cannot shape their destiny by just making our own decisions, but we can influence their destiny by our decisions. So, as the most strong nation in the Middle East, we can take the initiative. We must take the initiative. And this is, part of myself. This is part of being a new Jew. Proud, vigorous, taking responsibility, do something. It's about thinking and it's about doingness. And this combination is so, it's in a contradiction to what we think about being in the Golan, being in the diaspora, being among the other peoples.
And yet, and I'm sorry because there's somebody here tending to their lawn, so I hope you can hear me clearly. Can you still hear me, Yair?
Yeah.
And yet, this is something that I really want our listeners to understand. You've spoken about what you don't want in terms of applying sovereignty to the Jordan Valley, and you're very much of the left, and you've spoken about a state for the Palestinian Arabs, but you are not opposed to unilateral moves by the State of Israel to
No
secure
problem.
specific communities in Judea and Samaria. I think a lot of people think, well, if you're of the view that we shouldn't apply sovereignty, then you must be against us being there. That's not the case. Tell us what your proactive New Jew initiatives are in Judea and Samaria for the Jewish communities in that area.
Yeah. Well, it's a very strong point. We tend to mix goals with ways. The goal is to be separated from the Palestinians. The ways could be unilateral, bilateral, or multilateral. And a good statesman can play with the ways when in the most suitable way. The goal is to be separated. I believe that in order to move the Palestinians forward and in order to move the region forward, we need to do something unilaterally. I will provide, an example. When I commanded Judea and Samaria division, we had started building a fence around Ariel, from Bet Aryeh to Ariel, around Gush Etzion, and around Emmanuel. So, in fact,
these are big population areas of Jewish people in Judea and Samaria.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And it was according to the vision of Ariel Sharon, the late prime minister at that time. And it was a brilliant idea. The idea of Sharon was the following: let's create our own borders. Yes, it won't get international recognition, but it's an example of taking the initiative. We keep our freedom of action everywhere, but we put something which is very solid. It has a security aspect, and at the same time, it has a symbolizing aspect. This is the overall idea. And it works both ways. For the Palestinians, well, the meaning is you cannot conduct terror attacks on the Jews, on the Israelis. For the Israelis, well, now you have boundaries. You have some limitations. You need to stick with the limitations of the state. So you can get this understanding, deep understanding of what is a statehood all about. Because we need to think that according to messianic approach, there are no boundaries. You can do everything. You can break any limitations, any boundaries. And Sharon understood at that time that this is a very problematic approach that has some sort of destabilizing effect on the region, on Israel, on the Israeli society. And unfortunately, because the stroke he got, it ended the overall process. And therefore, right now, we are in a purgatorium. What is the purgatorium? It's midway between heaven and hell, between earth and heaven. And we are separate. We separated ourselves for 60-70% from the Palestinians, but we didn't finish the process. So right now, we are in a very strange position, because at the same time, there are two processes, one of annexation, one of separation, and you cannot distinguish between the two today on the ground because both of them works together. And this is a very problematic situation for Israel. We need to make this crucial decision. What do we want? Separation or annexation? This is the most important question for the Israeli nation.
Let me ask you a quick question about that, Yair, and then I want to get into some of the political experiences that you've already had within your political life, as I say. So you have a situation where many people say that the strategic threat to Israel is an Iranian nuclear capability. And you have a situation where people say it's the relationship with the West and with democratic states in the United States of America. But I followed your campaign from when you first jumped into the political waters. You have never, ever let go of the Israel-Palestinian issue as the most important, most pressing issue. Now, do you rank that above and beyond even the Iranian threat, the ensconcement? You were the former commander of the Northern Front, so you know this area well. Is that strategically more important to you than even the Iranian threat, the ensconcement of Russia on our borders, any other issue? Can you just put that into an order for us?
Yeah. Well, yes, the answer is yes. And I would say the following. Any external threat to Israel is something we have experienced before. Well, each time, it has different meanings, security meanings for Israel. And I have no intention to downsize the Iranian threat. It's a very serious threat, and we need to prepare for it. We need to prepare for the Iranian threat defensively and offensively. And we need to remember that in order to cope with the Iranian threat, we need to have very strong deterrence, no doubt. And I can provide, a long lecture about the Iranian threat. But I know one thing for sure. The Iranian threat doesn't endanger the Israeli society, the boundary, the bonds between the different factions in the Israeli society. All of us will fight the Iranian threat in the most determined way, no matter when, no matter where. I'm sure about it, because it's a typical external threat that unified the nation, while the Palestinian threat is much more serious because it endangers the bonds between the different factions inside the Israeli society. The Palestinian threat tore the Israeli society from the inside. And we need to remember all the time that 99% of the Israeli internal political violence is because of the territories questions. It's because of Judea, Samaria, and the Gaza Strip. Because of our relationship with the Arabs. This is the issue. We need to remember all the time that what makes nations fall, mainly, inside processes rather than external threats. And if you take this lesson out of the history, you do recognize what are the most dangerous processes encircle Israel today. And I can explain even the political situation we have today by the different attitude of different parties to the Palestinian issue.
So when you joined and when you last ran for office, for elected office, I'm turning now to the political sphere, though I have to tell you there are so many things I'd like to ask you about security and strategy, and I hope you'll come back and give us the opportunity to ask you again. Turning to the political sphere and your campaign for election, you had a very succinct, clear tagline, Now, I've had the pleasure of interviewing a number of politicians. They always define themselves as center, center right, center left, center centered. You have done something completely different. You've come out with a tagline and it says, Yair Golan, small, Yehudi, ge'eh. Left, Jewish, proud. Why? Why did you feel that you needed to put that out there? Because in my opinion, it does exactly what it says on the tin, as we say in the British expression. But very few politicians will do that, which is again another reason why I don't rank you really as a politician. In my mind, it's partly because there's an idea that if you are on the left, you're somehow embarrassed of your Judaism. If you're on the left, you're somehow ashamed of the state of Israel. Nothing could be further from the truth. You're a man who's spent his life fighting for that. Why did you come up with that line? And is there something to what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I came with it because I feel it's me. I stick with my inside truth. And I feel this is the best way to describe myself. So, people told me that politics is all about emotion. And these are my emotions concerning, my identity. And I would like to explain even more.
Yes.
What is to be in the left? To be in the left is to be progressive. This is the very original meaning. Conservative in the right, progressive in the left. And I consider myself as a progressive Jew, as a progressive Israeli. What is to be a progressive? Progressive, the meaning of it is that we can encompass different challenges for the Israeli state, for the Israeli society, from all kinds of angles. It's more complicated. It's more sophisticated. But this is reality. We need to be sophisticated in order to cope with very strong challenges. And yes, if you want to ensure security for Israel, you need to take at the same time strong military deterrence and very wise diplomacy. Do we know how to do that? Yes, I think I can bring, these aspects together. To be progressive for me is not to be a socialist, but to provide some sort of economical safety net for the population of Israel. We see it, right now during the Corona crisis. Are we able to keep, the middle class and the lower class alive in times of crisis? In order to do it, you need to be progressive. It's not about brutal capitalism. It's about a capitalism with some sort of, I would say, compassion for everyone. To be progressive is to separate between the formal religious aspect of the state and the citizens. There is no need in Israel today to be married through the rabbinical establishment. Why? Why in Israel why can't we go to the local municipality and sign, the right documents and finish the process like everything else we did in our lives in Israel? Why we coerce Israeli citizens to stick with some sort of religious aspect which they do not believe in? It's against, the very nature of democracy. And I'm pro-religious. I'm strong. I have a very strong Jewish identity. I do not have to explain it. It's part of me. And I think that therefore I don't need any coercion from the outside in order to explain me that, all right, you need to do this and that according to some sort of religious, documents. And the fourth aspect is to strengthen all the time the democracy.
So
And this is not what we see today in Israel. So I tend to say that to be in the left today is more than ever before to be in the progressive aspect of the Israeli political arena. This is the meaning of being in the left. Jewish, well, I explained that. I have no intention to give up my identity, and even more. There are people in the left who told me that if you say you are Jewish, you reject, the Arabs. And I said to them over and over again, on the contrary, if I have a strong identity, my ability to accept others is much wider. It's much more developed. So in my mind, I'm ready to accept the Arab society of Israel easily with the most positive intentions because I'm so proud with my identity. I don't feel under threat. And when you have a lot of confidence, self-confidence, you can accept others easily. And proud, well, my political camp, tend to be suppressed in the last 30 years. Mainly in the last 20 years. And I want to tell my friends in the left that you need to be proud, because to be proud is to be more active. To be proud is to be more vigorous. To be proud is the ability to speak up. And I want my people to speak up and fight any, fundamental elements in the Israeli society.
Yair, before I keep going, you kindly dedicated 1 hour of your time to us. Can I push you to an hour and 15 minutes? Can you give us an hour and 15 minutes? Give us an hour and 10.
I can. I just have another Zoom meeting, so.
Let's try and get through.
5 minutes, it's okay, but not beyond that,
Okay, I'm going to keep going then. Let's try and get through a couple of points that I've been wanting to ask you for a while. And then I'm going to open it to the audience questions, because we really have a very long list of questions from them. I'm going to finish my side of this with a question that emanates from our conversation in Tel Aviv when we sat down in a cafe. And I said to you, I'm building this Miriam Institute along with Rosita, my colleague. I want you to be an expert on it, publish. What would you like to write on? You started talking about, northern border security and so forth. But I looked through your bank of statements, and you are interested in matters far beyond security, far beyond the military. You're very philosophically inclined and religiously inclined. And one of the things you said to me, and I want you to answer it for me now, was, we, the secular Jewish left in Israel, are very good about saying what we don't want in Israel. But we've been very bad about saying what we do want our Judaism to look like. You were reflecting on that because if I remember correctly, you were reading a book at the time by Rav Soloveitchik, and you were saying you can't get the younger generation to pick up a book like that. So before I open to the audience questions, what do you want the Israeli Jewish left to be about? Not against, but about.
Well, first of all, we need to take responsibility for our Judaism. What is to be a progressive Jew in Israel? It's very, I believe that people in the States or in the UK or in Australia, for them it's very easy to say what is to be a Jew in Australia, a progressive Jew. But we need to define what is to be a progressive Jew in Israel. What are your values? And what are the sources of your values? For instance, when I take, Avos from the Mishnah and say, this is my document, this is the writings that, I take my sources out from. Well, this is very strong saying. And unfortunately, not enough progressive Jews today really take, the Jewish origins of their progressiveness. And for me, it's very important. When I read Jeremiah or Isaiah, for me, it's a moral books. It's a moral. These books describes moral standards, which I totally identified myself with them. So I would say that, I cannot describe myself without my Jewishness. This is something the left need to adopt. Mm-hmm. The other thing is about activity. We need to be much more active in order to encompass all faction in the Israeli society. It needs, much enthusiasm, much resilience, much patience, in order to see something good out of it. But we need to be not just in Tel Aviv vicinity. We need to go everywhere. And we need to have a flag with some national projects on it. Yes, we need to go back to the Negev, to the desert, and do great things there, because the destiny of Israel as one of the most populated states in the world. We need to go to the desert. There's no other way in order to live in a reasonable way in Israel. So we need to take these, national projects and do again what we did back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s of the 20th centuries. So this is the issue. We need to look at societies in transition. And I believe that today, the Arab society and the ultra-Orthodox society, both of them are in a transition process. And we need to be there. We need to accept them. We need to be with them, and not in some sort of patronizing way. It's by being with them, to share with them their difficulties and provide them some solutions for their difficulties. So this is the meaning of, of being the new left in Israel.
So let's go to the audience questions. I'm going to do something that I don't normally do. My captain from my military service, who led me in and out of Lebanon, he's actually sent us a question here for you. And he asked the following. His name is Matan. And he said, did you consider joining Avodah, the Labour Party, as a first option? Do you see it as having a future? And finally, and I'll let him ask his three questions because he is, after all, my captain. Do you think that the Israeli voters turned right, or that Israeli parties turned left?
Well, I would say the following. The Labour Party right now is in a terrible situation. Basically, concerning my values, my beliefs, I belong to the Labour Party, but I don't find today a political base, a political home in the Labour Party, unfortunately. I have no intention to analyze the situation of the Labour Party, but this is the situation right now. So there is a possibility of doing something very, very dramatic in the Labour Party in order to change it. But I'm not so sure whether this is my task, my destiny, my main mission to go there and fix it. If it could be fixed, by any means. So this is about the Labour Party. The second question was
Did you
about...
consider joining the Labour Party?
No, I have no intention right now to joining them. They are in the coalition. I'm in the opposition. So it's impractical right now. So it's not a practical issue right now. Just impossible, for political considerations. But there was another part of the question.
He says here, do you feel that the Israeli voters turned right, or that Israel's political parties have turned left?
This is very, very interesting question. Why? Because most people tend to say that the Israeli public goes to the right. I don't think so. I totally reject this conclusion. I think that basically most Israelis concerning their stance are in the left, but their identity is in the right. It's maybe a surprising answer, but I believe this is the situation. So from a very emotional aspect, they belong to the right because the left are the wealthiest people in Israel, people who came from Europe, Ashkenazis, and so on. But if you take the stance, the very basic stance, most Israelis do not want annexation. Most Israelis do not want cruel capitalism in Israel. Most Israelis want to keep their democracy and freedom. Most Israelis do not think that religions should have some sort of a cohesive, aspect. So I believe that, in fact, it's easy, relatively easy. Well, everything in politics is very difficult, but relatively it's easy to change the Israeli from right to left because of this complexity.
Let's ask about the Israel-Palestinian issue. This question comes from Roger, and I'm going to be mindful of your time, Yair. But Roger says that in view of all of the empirical evidence of incitement on the part of the Palestinian Authority, what concrete evidence do you base your view that the PA is open to negotiations for a permanent peace with the state of Israel, with no further claims for the right of return?
Well, I do not trust the Palestinians, and I have no intention to let them to determine my destiny. Therefore, I think that the unilateral steps has full legitimacy. And right now, while Mahmoud Abbas is about 85, and the future of the Palestinian Authority is not so clear, well, the only possibility to move forward with some sort of a reconciliation process is about moving forward slowly and in a very deliberate and conscious way. This is the kind of a policy I would like to adopt. So we need to separate. We need to move forward very slowly, and I don't think that we need to reach some sort of a final agreement with the Palestinians. What I learned from my experience, temporary matters are the most stable matters in the Mediterranean, in the Middle East. So I don't need, some sort of final paper. final accord. I would like to have a lot of midterm agreements with the Palestinians that ensure that we lessen the friction between the two people, creating better conditions for further reconciliation, smoothing, all the frictions, and it's a matter of generations, and we all need to admit that.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot solve decades of austerity by single paper.
Right.
You need to work on a process. It's a long process. It's a very problematic process, but you need to create the right conditions in order to facilitate this process for years, for the coming years. So that's what I have in my mind. And by the way,
please,
because it's a slow process, maybe I cannot promise that, to anyone, but maybe we would be able to expand the cake and to maybe to deal on other aspects of the agreement about future agreement with better conditions economically or from a territorial aspect. We don't know. Look at the situation of Egypt. Egypt is on the edge all the time economically. 100 million people with no ability to control the birth rate, with less and less water in the Nile, and with the Ethiopian project of the huge dam they have on the Blue Nile, it's going to be even more problematic. So maybe if we expand the bilateral agreement, which is so needed, to some sort of a multilateral agreement, maybe we can bring Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia to contribute, each one of them, something to the well-being of the region. Yes, I know, right now it sounds, a utopistic story, but in our region, utopia is a very practical issue. And therefore, we need to have the patience and, the stamina and to move forward slowly, but keep moving all the time. Because when you keep this movement, people get the feeling that, all right, we are on the right way. We are moving. We are not in a stagnant position. Stagnant position is a kind of an illusion for people in Israel, and mainly for decision makers. It creates some sort of temporary stable situation which cannot last forever. And in most cases, you don't see the underground process that are going to move this stability and to change it entirely. But if you move all the time, then it's much more stable from being in the same position. I know it sounds philosophical in a way, but think about the processes in our region and elsewhere in the world. People who think that you can freeze history are so wrong. So you need to understand what history tells us. What is the meaning, the hidden meaning behind history, and then capture, this process and make it your own process. Participate in the process. And if we're able to participate in the process, then you can ensure the destiny of your people in much better way.
Yair, do you have time for one last question? May I ask one last question?
One last question, yeah.
One last. So this comes from David. He's a military veteran. He's a graduate of Harvard Law School. And he's asked the following. He says, over the last few years, Israel has increasingly become a partisan issue in the United States. As a left-of-center American who considers himself a friend of Israel, and David is not of the Jewish faith, he says that this strikes him as very unhealthy for the relationship on both sides. Do you detect something similar in Israel? Question one. In other words, are Israelis becoming split around their support and friendship of the United States? And question two, what can be done to ensure that the US-Israel relationship is not a partisan issue in either country?
Yeah. Well, it's a very good question. I would say that what we have with the United States is very unique. And, I compare, my relationship with American officers, comparing, to Brits or French or German officers. It's totally different. What we share with Americans is a kind of common values. And I would say, in a way, common experience, a society of immigrants, a society with a lot of young people who just came in and did some, unbelievable things. And I feel that I have very strong connection with Americans. And we need to facilitate this sense of common values, which is much stronger than, bold politics, international politics. It's not about interests, or it's not about just interests. It's also about values. And what we see today concerning the relationships of Israelis with Americans, mainly with the Democrats, and even between Israelis with the Jewish community in America, is a kind of a split. This is terrible. It's a huge mistake conducting by Benjamin Netanyahu to create this friction between the Jews of America and the Jews of Israel, between Israel and the Democratic Party or the more progressive elements in the American society. It's just a mistake. It's for, very temporary advantages inside the Israeli politics, while while ignoring the ramifications for the destiny of Israel. So I think that concerning American politics, we need to be bipartisan entirely. And we need to be with good relationship with Democrats and Republicans at the same time. And it doesn't make a difference for us whether the American president is from the Democrats or from the Republicans. And we need to smooth our relationship with the American Jewry. I think it's totally unacceptable that today in Israel, we do not provide the same conditions for Reform Jews and conservative Jews in Israel. It's totally unacceptable. They are very good Jews, and the fact that we rank them, if you are Orthodox or modern Orthodox, it's okay, but if you are conservative or Reform, you are not so okay. This is totally unacceptable. From my perspective, if you are Jewish, you are Jewish, you are Jewish, that's it. I don't care about the way you conduct your ceremonies, the way you pray, the way you believe, or the way you don't believe. It's okay. We are one nation, and we need to remember all the time that being Jew is about religion, but much more than that. It's about nation. It's about identity. I hug everyone with the Jewish identity. And this is, I think, the meaning of the Jewish state. And at the same time, and this is a good point to end this conversation. And at the same time, because we are so proud about our Jewish identity, we can accept others easily. And we honor their identity. And we provide them the best conditions in order to cultivate their identity in the most proud way.
Well, Yair, I just want to thank you on behalf of me, on behalf of the Miriam Institute, my colleague Rosita Panini, my great and powerful colleague Alan, also to your colleague Noah and your team over there. Thank you so very much, not just for being on this call and for continuing my personal education and educating others. Thank you for continuing your service to the States of Israel, and thank you for showing what it means to be small, Yehudi, Ge'eh, left, Jewish, and proud. Go from strength to strength, and reiterated appreciation. All the very best.
Benjamin, thank you so much. And, be well, all of you, and avoid corona disease. It's terrible.
Absolutely. Amen. Be
Thank
well.
you very much. Thank you very much. All the best.
Bye-bye.